VTalk, a podcast by VTech Solution.
We're also going to be speaking at this federation. We're going to be speaking about enabling security hybrid multi-cloud solutions for government organization. So as I said before, Greg Smith and Jeff Adams are both here, along with myself, Tia Rubble. Greg Smith is the CEO of MISI, and then Jeff is the National Director for Cloud Support, Cloud Sales at Public Sector, MWare. All right, so the first question, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff. You guys can go ahead and unmute yourselves if you'd like. In your experience, what are the primary drivers and benefits that organizations should consider when adopting a hybrid multi-cloud strategy?
Greg, you want to take that one first, or would you like me to take this one first?
No, I'll be happy to take it first if you want, sure. Jeff. So Tia, just on behalf of Missy, I wanted to say thank you for allowing both myself, and I'm sure Jeff would say the same thing, allowing us both to speak. Coming back to your question, I think, some of the key drivers are pretty simplistic, right? I think cost is one of the key factors. Having the ability to have geographically diverse locations, I think, is very important, especially when you consider disaster recovery and, kind of the continuance of operations. The other thing that I really like about multi-cloud is that when you look at other vendors, one of the key things is who's doing the most innovation in what spaces. So I think that you get best of breed market innovation by having multiple vendors participate in your cloud infrastructure. So, those are the couple things that I would consider very important drivers and benefits to an organization.
Thank you, Greg. Agreed. Jeff, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, and again, first and foremost, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak in front of this group. Definitely agree with everything that Greg says. I kind of try to encapsulate that when I have a conversation with the people that I'm talking about, and I call this intelligent workload placement, right? And this is really the primary benefit that I see in a hybrid multi-cloud solution. So like Greg said, cost and location, getting access to innovative native services. I think other things that people look at when they're looking at clouds are things like compliance. Can I get a more compliant solution in the cloud, or can I work with a cloud vendor to be able to enact some of their compliance and thus getting greater compliance on my workloads? And then I think one of the most overlooked things when people are looking at hybrid cloud is what are my license agreements allow me to do? And what are some of the benefits that I can take advantage of? And is it more advantageous to go into a cloud environment to be able to do things like virtual desktops or database applications or some other things? So I try and take all those cost compliance, license agreements, location, native services. And again, I encapsulate that into what I call intelligent workload placement and being able to find the right solution or the right location for that workload, and that may be inside of the public cloud domain, or that might be inside of the private cloud domain.
Thank you. Yeah, that I agree. That makes sense, especially licensing. That was a really good answer. Shubi, can you share the next slide? Okay. So question 2. Hybrid multi-cloud environments often involve complex integration challenges. What are some practical approaches or best practices that you would recommend to organizations to overcome these integration hurdles? Greg, if you want to answer first, you can.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tia. I think there's a couple key things, right? I think that we need to have, kind of enforcement of consistent policies across the cloud. And, not only should it be around performance, but again, as a cybersecurity person, I think that you have to have consistent enforcement across your multi-cloud environment from a security standpoint as well. I do think you have to have a central repository for code, right? So, you're working off of one baseline of code I think that, from a development standpoint and a training of your employees, you have to be cloud agnostic, right? You don't want to have specifics that understand Azure versus AWS versus Google. You need to train your employees to be kind of multi-cloud consistent from a training standpoint and a user standpoint. So those are kind of the 3 bullet points that I prefer to talk about when I talk about that question.
Okay, and Jeff, do you have anything that you'd like to add to that answer?
Yeah. For me, where I see a lot of my customers get hung up on this integration is not doing the proper application discovery, right? And really looking at how their applications are actually really put together. I think inside of government, in particular, we've got a lot of legacy systems that are out there, and I call this the spaghetti web of integration stories, right? In terms of how all these things are intertwined, and so I think before people even start this hybrid cloud journey, I really, really highly recommend people doing a very thorough, application discovery. So that way they can understand where all those integration points are. The devil is always in the details, and when we do these kind of projects here at VMware, this is the longest piece of our migration story is being able to do that application discovery. And then once you do that, I think doing things like code repositories, super important. Looking at security strategies for all of those different integration points, super important. But taking a step back and really doing a thorough deep dive on how your applications actually work together, I think you'll start to find where some of those loopholes and some of the challenges are going to be as you start your migration, and that's really where you can focus your time.
No, yeah, I agree. I think you brought up a really good point with the legacy systems and integrating and modernizing and transferring over. It's a lot of data and different aspects to that. Shubi, next question, please. So it says data security and appliance are critical concerns for businesses in the cloud era. How can organizations ensure data protection and regulatory compliance while operating across multiple cloud platforms? Jeff, if you want to go ahead and answer that first, you can.
Yeah, and I'm really interested, since Greg really comes from a strong security background, really super interested in his response. But giving mine first, right? Is looking at this question, it's got the word ensure in there. I don't know if you could ever ensure data protection and compliance, right? So I think that's definitely a challenge, whether you're talking again about private cloud or about public cloud. Is how do you work within the realm or your sphere of influence, and really realizing that the vendor community has done a lot to really develop a compliant solution. So here at VMware, we've got a very deep compliance bench. We have a lot of people who spend time on things like IL5 and PCI and FERPA and all these different regulatory things to make sure that our solutions are compliant. We also have a group that works with organizations to help them to get their own ATOs to be able to make sure that their solutions, when they're deploying them on their solution on their side, are compliant as well. So one of the things I would recommend to people is to really work with that vendor community to understand what tools and resources they have to be able to help you reach that desired goal of compliance and of data protection.
Okay, Jeff, that was great. I'm sorry, I should have started with Greg though. You're right. Greg, if you want to go ahead and add to that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. Jeff gave a really good answer, especially coming from the vendor side. I think of a couple other things. I'm going to come back to that consistent security policy across the ecosystem that you're using. I think that's the first thing that you have to do. I think that you want to have continuous monitoring and visibility into that entire cloud environment. And the best way to handle that is with a single pane of glass. And what I mean by that is, taking that tool set and putting it into a system where you can look at everything all at the same time. One of the other things is, the automation around that is very important as well. And then the last thing that I'll bring up is that you really need to have a assessment and an audit process around that as well. So, whether it's bringing in a red team or something like that to do that, I think is key for anybody that's considering this multi-cloud environment.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a really good answer. Okay. Cost optimization is a significant aspect of cloud adoption. From your perspective, how can organizations effectively manage costs in a hybrid multi-cloud setup while meeting their performance and scalability requirements? Jeff, would you like to go first, or?
Yeah,
Guys?
sure. It's you have 50% chance of guessing on the right person to go. So I'll start with this one. So I think
It's you.
exactly. So no, I mean I think Greg brought up a great point on the last one about that single pane of glass, right? And talking about managing costs and meeting performance and being able to have that single pane of glass. And being able to be nimble when you see things that are outliers, and whether they're inside of performance or you're going to have an event that requires some kind of scalability. I think that single pane of glass is super important. I know everybody who's listening to this has unlimited funds and unlimited resources and has the ability to do whatever they want when they so choose to. But some of my customers, believe it or not, are resource constrained, and they are funding constrained. And so really having that visibility into what's going on through that single pane of glass allows them to get that visibility in almost real time, right? I think people struggle with real-time visibility, but having that single pane of glass allows them to be able to be nimble, allows them to be able to see, where am I getting my best cost vectors from? Again, I think it goes into some of that intelligent workload placement as well, right? Where is this application going to be most cost performant? I think we're starting to get into this world of democratized cloud, where you're starting to see some pricing wars between the public cloud. I forget how many pricing reductions Amazon has said they've had over their lifetime. I want to say it's something like over 100 pricing reductions. So I think as we get more and more into this, you're going to see more competition for the workloads. I think you're going to see cost play an interesting piece of this, and then having that real-time visibility to be able to port or to maneuver these workloads into the best cost per CPU or price per performance or location-based pricing or any of these different factors. Having that single pane of glass is going to be critically important for organizations to be able to be nimble and dynamic in the new world.
Thank you. Great question. Great answer. Sorry. Great answer. Agreed. Shubi, can you go on to the next question, please?
Would you mind, T, if I added a couple points to that?
Sure.
Yeah, thanks. I think there's a couple things, that get right down to costs. And I've experienced this as a CEO where we did run multiple cloud environments. And I do think that you need to have the ability to track your costs by your cost center itself. I think you also have to have the ability to not be afraid to turn off unused resources. I think that's a very important piece. And then the last thing that I'd say is, very often, especially in the government, you see silos. You have an engineering silo, and then you have a finance silo. And that was the same in my organization. We had engineers looking at one thing and finance wondering about the costs. And I think what you really need to do is you need to bridge that gap between finance and engineering to make sure that they're communicating effectively to understand sort of the engineering and cost curves to ensure that you're getting exactly what you need, but for the right price. And I think that's something that's very important. And I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Tia. I just thought that those things were a couple important points that people should know.
No, I agree. I agree. Sorry about that. Okay, on to question 5. Interoperability and data portability can be challenging in multi-cloud scenarios. What are some strategies to enhance data mobility and application of portability across different cloud environments? Jeff, can you start us off with an answer to this question, please?
Yeah, no, and I think we've here at VMware, we kind of call this the third stage of the journey, right? In terms of cloud and cloud adoption. That first stage really being cloud first, where people were saying everything must be into the public cloud, and I'm not buying any more hardware, and it's public cloud or bust. During the COVID period, or the active COVID period, I should say, we went into this kind of cloud chaos where it was dumping stuff into the cloud, right? People didn't have access to the data center anymore. People needed, application access and infrastructure access from outside of the four walls of the organization. And that wasn't something that government was used to providing. We were used to being sitting in a location and being able to walk over to the raised panel floor room and gain access and be able to unplug things and be able to see our blinking lights. And we were very happy with that. And now in this third stage, as we're coming out, we call this really being cloud smart. Again, this is a piece of my intelligent workload placement story, but is how can I be cloud smart, and how can I place this workload in the right place? And I think what you're starting to see coming from the vendor community, and you're starting to see it from VMware, is really these cloud agnostic tools, and making sure that you're working with vendors who do have cloud agnostic tools that allow you to run on multiple clouds is obviously going to provide you that ability to go across all of these different environments. I think one of the things that people miss as they're starting to go into their cloud journey is that they look at all these native services and they don't realize that these native services really are vendor locked in, right? So as you use these vendor native services, if you use Azure's Active Directory to be able to authenticate into your cloud, guess what? Azure Active Directory does not work with AWS's EC2 instances, right? If you use AWS's CloudWatch, you can't monitor an Azure environment, right? So I think working again with your vendor community, and maybe it's a tiny bit self-serving, but I think the vendor community, in terms of getting cloud agnostic, you can look at a lot of the backup providers and a lot of the data management providers. They work across different cloud types. You look at infrastructure providers like VMware and some of our competitors in the space. We all work across all of the different cloud platforms. You look again across some of the security solutions, or some of the data management stuff, right? They work across cloud partners or different cloud providers. So, I think working inside of that ecosystem and really understanding what your intention is, and being intentional as you're selecting your different vendors, and asking that question, hey, how does this work inside of an Amazon environment? How does this work inside of a Google environment? How does this work inside of Oracle? Make them show you, right? Look for that single pane of glass. Look for those different integration points, and really do your due diligence to be able to see, is it really portable, or are they just saying that it works across different clouds?
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, that was very detailed. Great answer. Great response. Yeah, that was really cool. Greg, if you wanted to go ahead and add anything to that.
Yeah, I think the one thing, if we want to talk about data portability, is that if you're a customer, you really need to use containers to move data from one place to the other. I think that's a very important factor. I also think, though, that when you're moving from a single cloud to multi-cloud, you really have to understand, kind of when, where, and why you want to do that. And I think that's a basic business fundamental. I'm sorry to keep hitting up on the security piece, but when you go multi-cloud, you really need to boost your security. And I think, another thing that you might want to consider is some third-party monitoring as well. But Jeff nailed it on the head, especially on the vendor agnostic piece.
As we see increasing trends toward remote work, how can hybrid cloud solutions support a distributed workforce and enable seamless collaboration? Okay, Jeff, I'll go ahead and give it to you since you're a vendor, and I'm sure you've been dealing with this type of issue since COVID with remote work and the cloud solutions.
Yeah, this kind of goes back to that cloud chaos, right? In terms of what are the benefits of cloud and remote work, right? There's really two pieces that cloud has enabled customers to take advantage of. One is being able to move the application and or the data to where the people are, right? And so as I was mentioning, I'm in the furthest west point in the connected 48 states right now, right? I can move my data and my applications with me. When I go back to the East Coast where I live, I can move my applications and I can move my data with me. And so, the cloud is really allowing people to have the best possible user experience while also looking at the factors like cost. And Greg keeps talking a lot about the compliance, right? If I go over the border from here into Canada, I don't have the same level of access because now all of a sudden our security profiles kick in. So it's very, very interesting in terms of how we can now have the applications and the data follow the people as they start to move about. The second thing I'd say is around elasticity, right? Is being able to meet the remote workforce demands when they're working and when the resources are needed, right? So when VMware originally started our business, we talked about being able to split computing horsepower amongst different applications. And now we can actually spin up and down demand for those computing resources in a real-time fashion without having all of this burden of cost, without having all of this extra hardware and horsepower sitting in a data center, just waiting for me to wake up and turn on my computer and start doing work. So, the cloud has really allowed the users and the data and the applications to travel. And then it's really allowed them that elasticity to spin up and spin down as the users actually need it.
Thanks, Jeff. Greg, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I just would say that in my opinion, cloud is the backbone of remote work. It's really allowed us to do that so effectively. And the one thing that I will add is, and probably everybody's used to remote work, but at least in my last company, we were very focused on products for remote work. And you just need to keep it simple because we have to remember that our people are working from a remote location where they don't have IT support. So, the mantra there is keep it simple, stupid. So it's easy for them to access it. It has to be secure, obviously, and I'm going to keep harping on that, but keep it simple, stupid is the key.
Nope, agreed. Makes sense. Totally agree. In your opinion, what are key factors that organizations should consider when selecting cloud providers and services for their hybrid cloud setup? Jeff, would you like to start out with this? I'm sure you have more input.
Yeah, I'll go back to my original comments around this intelligent workload placement. I think I'm going to get the bumper sticker and the T-shirt made around this and see if I can monetize it at all. But for me, it's really looking at all of those different things that we've been outlining. Security, cost, compliance, location. And doing a really proper application discovery will really highlight where that application or those set of applications or that infrastructure needs to go. And I think that the better people do on that front end, the more it's going to show them what is the appropriate cloud, right? Is it a SQL database? Maybe a SQL database makes sense to go inside of a Microsoft platform, right? Maybe it's a big data and you're using Google's big data query. Well, putting your application next to that big data query makes sense because you're going to lower your latency and your time to response between the applications and the data set. So, what I really, really, really harp on people on is doing that proper application discovery. And more times than not, the proper destination is going to unveil itself to you versus you having to go out and find it. So, Greg, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things that are really important, right? Beyond just what Jeff had said. I think service and support is a very important factor here. I think that you also want to delve into the product and service roadmap. Where are these vendors going? What's their thought? What's their thought coming back to that innovation point that I made earlier? What are the certifications that they have, right? And the best thing that I always do when I'm talking about switching vendors or adding vendors is pulse your network, talk to reference customers. Don't be afraid to talk to your peers about what they're using and what their experience has been. And I think those are really important, factors when considering, vendors.
Yeah, I think one other piece also, Greg, that you were talking about a little bit there is also looking internally at your skill set, right? What is the skill set of your organization, right? And so as you're, you may be most excited about going into Google's cloud, right? But you may not have the resources to be able to be able to take on a new cloud provider and a new set of operating procedures. So I would also say looking internally and making sure that you don't overextend yourself, right? Because you may think that latest whiz bang thing is going to solve all the world's problems, but if you can't support it, if you can't make it secure, if you can't operationalize that, it really does you no good, right?
Absolutely.
No, absolutely agree. Very good point. Very good point. Definitely customization on what the company needs for their cloud from their cloud providers. Shubi, next question, please. Hybrid multi-cloud is often seen as a way to avoid vendor lock-in. How can organizations balance vendor diversifications and maintain a cohesive and manageable cloud environment? Jeff, would you like to go first, or Greg? I don't mean to keep coming at you, Jeff.
I'm going to take Greg's lead on this one. So Greg, why don't you go for it?
Well, thank you. We see who the favorite is. That's for sure. Okay. Anyway, sorry, Tia. Again, I think that having a single pane of glass is very important. And to pull on the thread that Jeff brought up, and this is something that I experienced at my last company, is that if you are not cross-training your employees on the different cloud technologies, you're going to fail. And I was running a small company. I had a team of 2 on Azure and a team of 2 on AWS. And again, small company. And shame on us for allowing our 2 Microsoft people to go on vacation. They were not cross-trained and we had an issue and we were in trouble, right? So again, I think that if you have the ability to cross-train your employees on multiple technologies kind of across your tech stack, the better off you're going to be. And again, I understand there's limitations to that, but that's really a key point for me. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah. That was your mistake of letting people go on vacation, Greg. So that's
exactly
that's a leadership issue. But for me, it's finding some good partners out there in the ecosystem to work with, right? And so while Greg is talking about some of those resource constraints, I would say reach outside, into your network of your partners. Here at VMware, we work with a lot of great partners who have expertise across all of the different clouds. And whether it's resource augmentation when, God forbid, you let people go on vacation, or it's allowing them to do a little bit of exploration in terms of some other unique services that are out there. I would say the partner community and that ecosystem of integrators that are out there, I've seen come a long way. Before, a lot of them were talking specifically about hardware-based solutions and getting more infrastructure and refreshing infrastructure inside of your own private data center. But there are a lot of what we call cloud-first partners that have very, very deep benches in terms of their experience with different cloud providers. So, I would say reach out to those ecosystems. A lot of times they'll give you assessment services. They'll allow you to do some try and buy stuff. You can do a fair amount on their dime to be able to get a little bit of experience. And then also a lot of them do have staff aug opportunities for you to be able to take advantage of some of their people. Maybe it's to cross train your people or just to do some experimentation.
No, that's a great idea to tag along with your partners if you have that type of issue, especially going on vacation together. Okay, question 9. Okay, there we go. Shuby, you're good. The public sector has unique requirements when it comes to adapting cloud technologies. How can hybrid multi-cloud solutions benefit government organizations while addressing their specific challenges? Greg, I'll have you go first since you swear Jeff my favorite.
That's okay. Everybody needs a favorite, so the vendor needs to be the favorite here. That's all good. Sorry, T, you set me up for that one. I think the amazing thing about the federal government is the diversification of requirements and needs across each one of the individual agencies. I mean, if you think about the variation between the Department of Defense and a civil agency, there's massive differences, right? So it's very difficult to find one solution that fits all. But I do think that you really need to have vendors that have the capabilities of being entirely flexible, right from an on-prem cloud solution to a hybrid cloud to a public cloud, all the way out to the edge. And I think that is really, really important. And I think that you have to keep your employees and your vendors, in their roles to ensure, kind of that complete data transfer from whatever cloud environment you're in out to the edge. I really think that this is a great question for Jeff because he focuses directly on the public sector. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeff on this one because I'm sure he has a lot of good comments.
Yeah, no, and thanks. And it's interesting. And I think on the next question we can talk a little bit more about edge-based computing. But when I look at the difference in my world of the public sector versus my counterparts' world in the commercial and in the corporate world, there's really two big differences that I see. One is around cost, right? Just because you're processing more doesn't mean that you're creating more revenue or you're creating more money or you have more availability to money. And literally in some of our customer cases, it takes acts of Congress to be able to get more money to be able to do things. So, if it's the IRS application that's doing all of the income process or the income tax return processing, and they've processed more returns in December and used up their entire budget because they've processed more returns, well, they still have to process until April 15th, right? And so, just because you can have these dynamic ebbs and flows and elasticity and all this great stuff, all of that comes at a cost, right? And you don't have unlimited funds to be able to say, hey, well, I processed more, so I should be able to get access to more money. So when I look at how organizations inside of my world handle cost and cost monitoring, it's super, super important for people to have, Greg, as you had mentioned, that single pane of glass and to understand cost control and what to do when they're starting to run hot, right? How am I actually going to throttle the applications, or how am I going to work inside of my community or my hybrid cloud infrastructure to be able to maintain and to control those costs? Because I've seen organizations, one of my favorites was a research institution. The researcher went on vacation or went on sabbatical for 6 months and came back to an over $100,000 bill because they left their instance running while they were gone on vacation, right, or on sabbatical. So, I see that really as a big one. And then the other big one for my customers is around compliance, right? Is really understanding, how can I gain that compliance? Greg, you mentioned talking about roadmaps and talking about how to work within that community around what their roadmaps of innovation are going to be. It's, how are they going from IL5 to IL6? How are they going from secret to top secret? How are they creating environments where you can have secure communications in a SCIF? How am I going to take my information up into space? How am I going to sink it deep inside of the sea in a submarine, right? There's all of these interesting compliance questions that come up with my customers in terms of how am I going to make sure that this data is going to be secure, and how am I going to make sure that, just because they say, hey, I can instantly move something from here to here, is that actually okay for your data, right? Is that actually okay for your compliance threshold to be able to do that? And again, working with your vendor community and working with your partners will really help you figure out what those Google Maps directions are to be able to handle your workloads inside of a hybrid public cloud.
Thank you, Jeff. Very detailed answer. Looking into the future, what trends or advancements do you anticipate in the hybrid cloud space, and how can businesses and government entities prepare for these changes? Greg, I won't ask Jeff the last question.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
No, I'm good. I think there's three things that we need to really focus on. The first one is regulation. I do think that there's going to be more regulation coming down the path, probably more so in terms of vendor diversification. The second thing I think we all need to be cognizant of is zero trust, right? I think that we are all working very diligently on zero trust solutions, and I think those are going to be incorporated into the cloud sooner rather than later. And then the trend that I think we have to all pay attention to, which I think will down the road help people, is vendor consolidation. I think that you'll start to see more and more vendors, especially more newer entrants, get gobbled up by some of the big players. And I think that down the road, having a complete stack or one throat to choke for your entire solution is going to be a great benefit and a cost savings. So I think those are the three trends, Tia, that I see that are going to be important going forward.
Agreed, especially regulation. Jeff, anything to add there?
Yeah, I would say, I'll bring up what I think's a good trend, and maybe I'll start with a maybe not as positive of a trend, but I'll start there is how are you going to get your data back, right? And I think what we're starting to see is people looking at things like repatriation of workloads because they're not getting the cost benefits that they thought they might have gotten out of public cloud. I think looking at security events, what happens when Amazon goes down, right? What happens when Azure goes down? How do you actually get access to these applications? What if there is a massive security event at one of these large public cloud providers? Do you have the ability to get your data back, right? So I think that that's one thing that we're now starting to see as we kind of went through this cloud first, cloud chaos, and cloud smart journey is how are you actually getting your data back, and how can you work? You know, we see all these ransomware events where people have their their servers encrypted and all of that kind of stuff. You know, imagine, God forbid, that happened inside of AWS, or imagine if that happened inside of Azure, right? And they lock out all of those servers. I'm sure people are trying on a minute-by-minute basis to do that. But you know, it's really looking at a data recovery strategy and looking at a business resiliency strategy. How do you get that data back? And I think organizations are starting to look at and need to focus. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. Is you know, maybe public cloud isn't the best for my environment, and maybe having some public and some opportunity to get the data back on premises makes a lot of sense for an organization. One of the exciting trends, and I did spend a little bit of time at AWS as well, was really looking at edge computing, right? Bringing the cloud out into the edge is something that I see a huge need for. So it's how do you take it out of these big data centers? You know, maybe for latency, you need to have it in a certain area, or maybe because you're operating in an austere or a forward operating position. How do you bring those services down to where the people actually are? So, you know, I see some very, very exciting trends around very, very small, portable, mobile form factors, being able to bring those clouds to where the people are and where they're operating. And I think that there's a lot of horsepower and a lot of innovation going into edge computing to be able to gobble up as much data as possible. You know, it's amazing. You know, we just went through an entire webinar. We didn't mention AI, ML, or any of that kind of stuff. So I think this might be a first over the past 6 months in webinar history here. But you know, getting the services down to the people, getting them to where that processing needs to happen, and having real-time access to cloud services is a very exciting trend that I see a lot of positive movement on.
Agreed, especially what you just brought up. Now, speaking on AI and zero trust, I appreciate both of your time. Those were really, really detailed and good answers. Okay.
I think good, yeah.
Questions, if you guys would like, you can open up the floor for questions. Either put them in the chat or just unmute yourself. Do they have the power to unmute? And if you guys have any questions, any of the attendees. No questions? All right, well, thank you so much, Jeff and Greg, for your time. We really appreciate it. This was a great federation. Like I said, very detailed questions coming from Jeff and Greg also. I do not have a favorite. I just want to make that clear.
There's got to be a theme of every webinar, right? So that could be our theme.
Well, I really appreciate you guys' time. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the attendees. And of course, my information's there as well as VTech's. Like we said, thank you again. You all have a good day.
Thanks, Tia. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Guys.
Thanks, Jeff.
You too. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Jeff and Greg. Bye, guys.
Bye.